Let's take a look here at this example that I have put together. What the user has when they first come to this page is a small form where it asks them to enter a number to count to. If I go and I actually put in a number, 4 for example, and continue, instead of saying enter a number to count to, the page now says your number is and shows me the actual number. The number itself is also still present in the field where I typed it, and I get an unordered list that counts up to that number. If I come down and I change my number and continue, it says your number is, it's correct again, same number is present, and it counts up to that number. Let's look at the script that I wrote that is making this work. The way this script actually works, kind of jumping through it and walking through how it works sequentially, is the first thing the user has is they have a form. That form submits back to the same page, self-submitting script, and it submits using post. What will actually be submitted then from that text field is a value called number. So number stored in the post array is what the script is going to be dealing with. When the user first visits this page, the very first thing that actually happens when the script executes is a number variable is created that starts off as a blank. It's empty. There's then an if statement that checks to see if a number value exists in the post array. If that is set, it will then take that value out and put that into the number variable. If there is no value in the post array called number, then the number variable remains blank. Once that's been determined, as the script continues to execute, the next thing that happens down inside the body is that we have an if statement here that checks to see if that number variable is blank. If it's the first time the user has visited the page, then the variable is blank, so what it does is it echoes a level 2 header that says enter a number to count to. Let's pretend that this is the first time I visited the page, so that's the actual output that happens. Everything here inside the else is skipped, and the user simply sees the form. So essentially at that point the user sees enter a number to count to, and they've got the form to fill in their number. When the user then actually fills in a number and submits it, right, again the script executes, the number variable starts off blank, this time is set, post number is true, so we pull the number out of the post array and put it into the number variable, so the number variable is no longer blank. When we then come back down to the body of the script, if the number is empty, it's false. The number is not empty. There is the number there that the user submitted. So instead it echoes your number is and shows the actual number. It then echoes an opening unordered list tag, and then using a counter-controlled for loop starting at the value of 1 and continuing on as long as the variable I is less than or equal to the value of the user's number, it will then continuously print out list items, each one containing the next sequential number from 1 up to the number that the user actually entered. That's then followed by the closing unordered list tag, and the actual number that the user entered is made the value of the text field, so it appears in the text field as if it stayed there all along. So that's basically the way this script works. It's nothing too terribly complicated, but it does do the job that it's meant to do. What I would like to actually talk about in this script is really this little section here. There's several different things happening here. First of all, we have a big sort of all-encompassing if statement that's deciding if we show the user enter a number to count to, or whether we show them their number and the actual count. So there's that if statement. There's also then a for loop inside the else section of that if statement that prints out the count up to the number that the user selected. What I wanted to point out about this section, what sort of bothers me about this section, in a way is sort of the ratio of PHP to HTML here. If you look at it kind of line by line, that line, the if statement here, is pretty much purely PHP, but this next line, other than the fact that it's an echo, is really almost completely HTML. The else statement, that's basically PHP, but the line after that, despite the fact that it has to have the number appended in there, that line I would say is really much more of an HTML line than it is a PHP line. The echoes where I start and end the unordered list are almost purely HTML and what they're meant to do. The for loop itself is PHP, but what's happening in the for loop is really much more HTML-like, I would say, than PHP-like. So we actually have a real mix-up here, a real mashup between PHP and HTML. Essentially, at the moment, it's written as a bunch of PHP statements that are outputting bits of HTML. And that's okay. That's not a terrible thing. PHP certainly can output HTML, no problem at all. But there's also times I think that it's pretty undeniable that HTML should, as much as possible, just be left as HTML. If we start going down this road where we're using PHP to generate a lot of HTML, well, why write the HTML form as HTML? Why not turn that into PHP as well? Why not have our form written as PHP outputting HTML? Where does it stop? Well, generally, I think one way or the other is generally the easier of the two ways. And with a lot of the lines that we have here in this block of PHP, I would say we've crossed the line. This H2 statement, this H2 statement, this unordered list, these list items, this closing unordered list tag, all of those lines, I would say, should be written as HTML, not as PHP. Well, how can we do that? Well, let's start off by transitioning this big if statement here a little bit. I'm going to take that big if statement, the beginning of it here, and what I'm going to do is after the opening curly brace, I'm going to go ahead and close those PHP tags right there. Then down here at the end, the closing curly brace that goes along with that if statement, I'm going to put that inside its own PHP tags, which leaves me with an extra there that I need to eliminate. Same thing with the else that's right in here. Let me put that inside its own PHP tags. There we go. That would then leave this line, this H2 line here, free to actually just be HTML. I could go in, get rid of the quotes, get rid of the semicolon, and let that line just be purely HTML. Would that work? Is that possible? Could I have an if statement written in PHP controlling the output of an HTML statement that is not written in PHP? The answer is yes, that will work. That is possible. How? How in the world can that happen? How can something written in one language control something written in another language? Way back at the beginning of class when we were first talking about PHP tags, didn't I say that the PHP tags determine what code to execute and what code not to execute? If that's true, then having PHP tags around the if statement mean the if statement itself would be evaluated, would be executed, but this line would not be. The way I described it before, the H2 line would be a line that PHP would essentially completely ignore. Well, what it really kind of comes down to, I'm ashamed to say, is that back at the beginning of class when I told you about PHP tags, I kind of lied to you a little bit. Not maliciously, of course, but just to kind of make things simple enough to get us started. We're to a point now where we're ready to take kind of a bigger look at what these PHP tags themselves actually are doing. The way things actually happen on the PHP server when a PHP script executes isn't that it's only the code inside PHP tags that are executed. In reality, what happens when we execute a PHP script on the server is that every line of the file, every line of the entire script, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, anything that's in the file automatically gets turned into a PHP statement. So take a line here like this H2 statement, for example. Since it's not currently inside PHP tags, what will happen is PHP will automatically turn that line into what is essentially an echo statement. So any line that's in our PHP script that isn't in PHP tags will simply be printed, will be output as it is without any other evaluation. But what's important is that it is actually turned into a PHP statement. Lines like this one, where we actually do have PHP code inside PHP tags, lines that are inside PHP tags when a script is evaluated will just be treated as they are. They will not be turned into an echo statement. So really our PHP tags, more so than saying this line is PHP, are actually saying don't mess with this line. This line is already written in the language of PHP. It doesn't need to be modified. So lines that aren't in PHP tags will be modified, will be turned into output statements. Lines that are in PHP tags will be left as they are. That then hopefully goes a little bit on the way to explaining how something like an if statement inside PHP tags could actually control a line that's not inside PHP tags. So something like this can actually work, which can have a great benefit because it means that we can let HTML lines simply be HTML lines. If it's easier to write something as HTML, we can do exactly that. Lines that need to be in PHP can be written strictly in PHP. How would that then affect the rest of my script down here? Well, this line, this H2 line, I think would actually be a lot simpler if it was just HTML, so let me get rid of the echo. I do still have this number variable inside it though. The number variable, if I want it to do anything, does actually need to be in PHP, so let me just put in some PHP tags with an echo statement around just that little part of the line. The opening unordered list tag here, there's really no reason that needs to be PHP at all, so I get rid of the echo. Same thing with the closing unordered list tag down here below, leaves me just like this. What about the for loop inside? Well, the for loop itself definitely needs to be PHP, so let me put that inside PHP tags along with its closing curly brace. The line that's outputting the list item tags, I would think would be a little bit easier to write just as plain HTML. So let me get rid of the PHP parts of it. But I do need to still show that variable. So let me put that part just by itself inside the PHP tags. And what I've done at that point is I've transformed that block that I had before into something that looks a little bit more like this. Now, granted, it's definitely different. Also, you can't really say that this is necessarily simpler, I wouldn't say, but I do think it's easier to write in a lot of ways, especially if we were dealing with a situation where we had HTML tags that involved attributes. HTML attribute values are almost always quoted, and if we have to quote the HTML value and then also quote the PHP string, that starts to get a lot more complicated. So I think that overall what we've done here is we've made an improvement to the writability and to the readability when you get used to it of how these statements are actually put together. Let's see if after those changes I've messed anything up. Let's see if things still work. Back over to the browser, I'll refresh the page. First visit, everything looks okay. If I give it a number like 5, oops, other than losing a space right there, I think pretty much everything has worked just fine. For that space, that would go right there. There, perfect. Okay, now there is still one little quibble I guess I have with this style, and that is the curly braces. The curly braces opening here at the end of a control structure line, like with an if or with the for, that's not terribly bothersome, I don't think, but I really don't like these closing curly braces here by themselves inside their own set of PHP tags. Can you imagine if we had if statement inside if statement inside if statement, so we had line after line of PHP tags containing nothing but closing curly braces? Boy, that would be ugly and very, very error prone, so I would like to avoid that as much as possible. And PHP does give us a tool, a syntax, that makes it easier for us to be able to avoid that type of nastiness. This tool that I'm referring to is sometimes referred to as the alternate syntax. It's something we can do with most all of PHP's control structures. With just about any control structure in PHP, if else, switch, with while, with for each, what we can actually do is with any of those, we can replace the opening curly brace with a colon. We can then replace the closing curly brace with the word end followed by the name of the control structure. So if it's a curly brace that's ending an if statement, we can put end if. Here with the for loop, we can do basically the same thing. The opening curly brace can become a colon. The closing curly brace can become end for. With the else, what we do is we just get rid of the curly brace before it, and the curly brace after it becomes another colon. Let's see if that works. Back over to the browser, fresh reload, everything looks good. I'm going to choose the number 9. Wonderful. Haven't changed at all how the script actually functions. I've only changed the way that the script was written. Changed it hopefully in a way that makes it more readable. Instead of having those sort of anonymous curly braces sitting inside their own ending PHP tags all by themselves, we now actually have the name of the control structure that is the end for. So there's no doubt here looking at this that that's the end of an if statement. No doubt looking at this that that is the end of a for loop, which I think improves readability immensely, and being able to combine our HTML code with or without this alternate syntax, and having the ability to simply write HTML tags as HTML tags, not necessarily having to turn everything into an echo statement, I think is a great benefit and can really make our scripts a lot easier to write, a lot easier to read, and much, much easier to debug.